Firearms inspection and troubleshooting. This week, we'll be talking about lever and pump action firearms. It's a very good lesson, guys, and we're going to have a very, very, very good week. But first and foremost, I always have to find out, do you have the right tools? It's going to be very important that before we undertake any job, we have the right tools. You've heard me say this time and time again. This week's spotlight is actually going to be a light. This is a bore light. Very handy tool to have, especially at your workstation. You may want to buy one just to throw into your range bag too. They're not expensive, like I always tell you. You don't have to go out and spend hundreds of bucks on your tools. Just make sure that they are effective. This one cost me about $10 at Walmart. It's got a little clip so you can keep it clipped on your shirt or your pants, wherever you need to. As you can see here, it's got that bendy neck, so you can put it in whatever position you need to get that light to shine where you need it to shine. The most effective use of it is when somebody complains of having something lodged inside of their barrel. Well, remember, you never want to point the muzzle toward your face, of course, or toward anything that you're not willing to destroy. So you can use this bore light to actually go in the muzzle end, and you can go look through the opposite end, the chamber end of that barrel, and you can look through there. If you see light, then nothing should be lodged, right? If it's dark, then you can pretty much bet that you've got something lodged in there, and it's going to be time to get to work. Now, let's talk about these lever-operated action firearms. These are going to be manually operated by the user, so every time a shot is to be taken, every time that cycle is to begin, the user has to manually cock that lever. The lever is usually located right there under the trigger guard, or near the trigger guard, should I say. And this was one of the best pictures that I have ever seen of how a lever action actually works. And if you pay attention to that picture, you can see that the rounds are actually stored inside of a tubular magazine, and that's going to be the dark kind of reddish color that you see in that picture. And the bright fluorescent reddish orange color that you see in the picture is actually the action, okay? So every time a round is fired, by actuating that lever, you're able to unlock. And when you do that, that spent casing is both extracted and ejected. And again, as that lever pivots on that hinge, it begins to cock, right? It grabs that next round, it feeds it, it chambers it, and then it locks. And then you're ready to fire again. But remember, this is a manual action. You have to do that every single time. Now, as with any other firearm, when you begin to troubleshoot and inspect a lever action firearm, you always want to first make sure that you go through your safety check. All right. Now, there are various ways of doing it, and I'll just share with you guys the way that I found better for me to do it to ensure that it is clear. Is I simply rack, or I simply actuate that lever as many times as it takes to ensure that there are no more rounds located in that firearm. All right. Now, again, there are several ways that you can do it. That is just the way that I do it. And you always want to make sure that that firearm is clear before you start to do any work on it. All right? Now, the good thing about that is, as you are making sure that that firearm is clear, you're also conducting a function check at the same time. That's the beauty in it, because you're also finding out if that lever action actually does what it is supposed to do. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. Now, if you start to feel that lever and it's gritty as you are cycling it, then you have an issue, right? Then you want to dive a little bit deeper into what the problem is. Okay, if it's not extracting, if it's not ejecting, then you have an issue. And remember, guys, you always want to do this to make sure you have some snap caps and or some dummy rounds just for this, because that's simply loading and unloading. But at any rate, you want to make sure you have some of these things to ensure that you can do your job as effectively as possible. Now, I always like to leave you guys with some important takeaways, and these things, again, are just used to keep your mind going and keep your mind focused on what we're actually talking about at that time. Now, you always want to ensure that there is no live ammunition present in your workspace. Remember the equation, guys. I'm going to drill this in your heads until you got it. But remember the equation. If you take away one part of that equation, then it no longer holds true, right? So if you remove that ammunition, we can ensure that that firearm cannot discharge. Lever actions have a simple yet unique operating system. We can never underestimate the importance of safety checks, guys. You can never underestimate the importance of making sure that that firearm is empty and clear of any ammunition. Whatever way you choose to ensure that you do that, make sure that it is effective. You always need to make sure that that firearm is safe before you begin working on it. Likewise, function checks are a must to ensure that that firearm is effective before you give it back to your owner, especially on firearms like lever actions. All right. So you want to make sure that you conduct a function check. And with these, remember, you want to pay attention. What I'm looking for most of the time is that operation, it's that cycling of that lever. Does it feel gritty or is it smooth? Okay. And you always want to ensure that there is no live ammunition present in your workspace. The second part of this week's lesson talks about pump operated action firearms. Now, they come in different platforms, but the one that we're most familiar with is probably going to be the pump shotgun. All right. Now, this is a 12 gauge pump shotgun made by Mossberg. The model is going to be a New Haven. It's an older shotgun. I was able to actually get it from a sale that was put on by the Department of Natural Resources to local law enforcement agencies here in the Atlanta area some years ago. Remember, guys, the tools that you get only need to be effective, right? They don't need to be expensive. They just need to be effective. But as you can see, this shotgun, normally the older model shotguns would have a wooden stock on it, and the pump would actually be, the slide would actually be wooden. And your newer models, of course, is made out of polymer and softer materials. But the pump shotgun is a very popular platform. So you may, in fact, come across those with customers that are having issues. So it's going to be important that you understand how to manipulate those and how to really dive deep into them. Now, you always want to conduct your safety check. And for these types of firearms, you always want to check the chamber, right? You can visually see it, but go ahead and stick a digit down in there and physically inspect it as well. Doesn't take but a second just to take that further step of safety, right? You also want to check to ensure that that tubular magazine that you load those shotgun shells into is empty. So you want to visually as well as physically inspect that. Now, the safety on this particular model is located here on the spine, and what you want to do throughout your function check is to ensure that the safety does what it's supposed to do. So again, you can use some snap caps when you're doing this, because now you may be doing some dry firing, okay? So what you want to do is put the safety in the on position, so make sure that the safe is on. Put the safety in the on position and try to actuate the trigger. Try to press the trigger. If the trigger does not press, safety appears to be functioning. Okay. Now, you also want to put the safety in the off position. So make the firearm ready to be fired. And if the trigger actuates, if you can press the trigger and hear that firing pin strike, then you can pretty much bet that the safety is in good working order. And now is also time to conduct your function check on the rest of that firearm. So you want to make sure that the slide moves freely. Make sure that it's not gritty in its function, just like we talked about with the lever actions. You want to make sure that as that slide actuates, it does what it is supposed to do. It extracts and it ejects those spent casings. It loads a new round in and it locks. You want to make sure that it does all of those things. Now, before you test fire, you always want to make sure that you understand what gauge it is, right? And what size shells can go in. And this is going to be usually stamped on the barrel somewhere on these firearms. So you need to find it and you need to make sure that you pay strict attention to it. Now, although this may not be part of the lesson, I do want you guys to pay attention to the shells. Now, you can look at these and these look very similar. The problem is the one on the left is a 16 gauge. The one on the right is a 12 gauge. So be very careful to the gauge of ammunition that you're using, A, when you're test firing, and B, when you're firing on your own. Now, as with every lesson, there are always some important takeaways, guys. Always some little nuggets just to keep in your pocket, just to keep your mind going. You always want to ensure that there is no live ammunition present in your workspace. That's always. Remember the equation. Pump action firearms can range from air guns to live fire firearms. They may look similar, but their functions may be different. But the important thing to remember is that we're going to treat them all with the same safety rules and precautions. All right, regardless of the projectile, we want to treat them all with the same safety rules and precautions. Function checks are a must to ensure that this firearm is effective before you give it back. Remember, guys, our reputation, our professionalism is at stake here. So when we are returning firearms, they should be functioning and functioning effectively. You always want to ensure that there is no live ammunition present in your workspace. That's always, guys, always. So as we close out this week's discussion, I just want you guys to start thinking a little bit more about some of the things that could happen and some of the remedies that you as the professional will undertake. So if you receive in a pump action shotgun and the owner is experiencing issues with the slide, I want you guys to start thinking about, what would I do? In that instance, what would you do? Hey, let's have a good week, guys, and let's get to work.